April 14, 1943, Fleet Radio Unit Pacific Pearl Harbor, the cryptographers. A pencil moved smoothly across the paper as intercepted Japanese naval codes were translated into English. The message originated from the Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, outlining a schedule for Admiral Yamamoto's inspection tour. It featured a detailed itinerary with precise arrival times at forward bases. Departure was planned for 0600 hours, Tokyo time, on April 18 from Rabaul, with an expected arrival at Barber Airfield at 0800 hours Tokyo time, utilizing 2 Type 1 medium bombers and accompanied by 6 escort fighters. Technical Sergeant Harold Fudina, a Nisei translator with the Military Intelligence Service, carefully checked his translation against the original cipher. The detailed nature of Japanese military planning provided an impressive level of specificity, including exact times, aircraft types, and routes. Commander William Goggins, who was managing FRUPAC operations, quickly understood the significance of the message. Within moments, the decoded intelligence reached Commander Edwin Layton, the Pacific Fleet intelligence officer. Layton's eyes widened as he realized the implications. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the strategist behind the Pearl Harbor attack, would only get one opportunity to be within striking distance of American fighters. Little did they know, this one decoded message would trigger one of the boldest fighter interceptions in aviation history. The Pacific War had taught American troops that Japanese leaders were not just military officers, they represented powerful symbols. Taking out that symbol could sap the morale of an entire fleet. Yamamoto was more than a naval commander. With a Harvard education and extensive travel, he had a deeper understanding of America than any of his peers. His alerts regarding American industrial capabilities had been ignored, and his doubts about entering a war with the United States had been overlooked. However, when the conflict began, he carried out the Pearl Harbor strike with great precision, gained early tactical victories in the Pacific, and nearly secured a decisive win at Midway before American codebreakers shifted the momentum. The Lockheed P-38G Lightning was positioned on the tarmac at Fighter Strip No. 2 Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. Powered by twin Allison V1710-89-91 engines, this aircraft can achieve speeds of 414 miles per hour at an altitude of 25,000 feet. Twin booms extend from the rear of the engines, connected by a horizontal stabilizer that spans 52 feet. The central nacelle accommodates the pilot and armament. It is equipped with 4 Browning A&M 250 caliber machine guns and a Hispano M220mm cannon positioned in the nose, effectively addressing the convergence issues typically found with wing-mounted weapons. With 2 external 165-gallon drop tanks alongside its 300-gallon internal capacity, the Lightning can cover a combat radius of over 450 miles, surpassing any other American fighter in the Pacific theater. Major John William Mitchell was in the operations dugout, examining weather reports and intelligence briefings. As the leader of the 339th Fighter Squadron, 347th Fighter Group, Mitchell had logged over 2,000 flight hours in various aircraft, ranging from basic trainers to the latest fighters. His strategic mindset operated with the precision of a navigation computer. The distance from Guadalcanal to the intercept point was a direct 435 miles. A direct flight would lead them over islands controlled by Japan, packed with radar and observation posts. The alternative route, which ventured far out to sea before turning north, added an extra 165 miles. The outbound journey totaled 600 miles, while the return was 400 miles, resulting in a combined distance of 1,000 miles, with fuel reserves providing perhaps 7 minutes of combat at war emergency power. The calculations were unforgiving. The P-38G's standard internal fuel capacity was 300 gallons in the main tanks and 60 gallons in reserve. With 2 165-gallon drop tanks, the maximum total fuel capacity reached 690 gallons. At cruising settings, fuel consumption was about 50 gallons per hour per engine at low altitude, increasing with altitude and power settings. Under perfect conditions, they had just over 5 hours and 45 minutes of flight time available. The mission required a minimum flying time of 4 hours and 30 minutes, assuming impeccable navigation and no delays. The margin for error was nearly non-existent when accounting for combat maneuvers and potential headwinds. Captain Thomas George Lanphier, Jr. had analyzed the mission profile so thoroughly that every detail was firmly ingrained in his mind. The son of Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Lanphier, Sr., a notable aviator from World War I who worked on General Billy Mitchell's staff, the younger Lanphier inherited the tactical skills and political insight that shaped his journey. Standing at 6 feet tall with a strong build and the demeanor of a natural leader, he had already notched 5 aerial victories, although some were disputed. His daring flying style and talent for self-promotion attracted both supporters and detractors in the squadron. At 27, Lanphier saw the Yamamoto mission as his ticket to fame and a successful political future. In contrast, First Lieutenant Rex Theodore Barber embodied a different kind of American fighter pilot. Growing up on a farm in Oregon and studying engineering at Oregon State College before enlisting in September 1940, Barber flew with careful precision and understated skill. While Lanphier sought glory, Barber focused on efficiency. His confirmed aerial victories were achieved through strategic positioning and accurate shooting rather than flashy maneuvers. By the age of 25, he had developed a sharp ability to visualize three-dimensional combat situations. His structured approach to aerial warfare, influenced by his engineering background, ensured that each maneuver was deliberate, every risk assessed, and each shot accurately targeted. While at Lakunai Airfield aboard Mitsubishi G4M1 Type 1 bomber number 323, Admiral Yamamoto went over the inspection schedule with his team. This bomber, referred to as the Betty by Americans, highlighted Japanese ingenuity but also showed its drawbacks. It had an impressive range of 2,850 miles, achieved through minimal armor and lacking self-sealing fuel tanks. With a maximum speed of 265 miles per hour at an altitude of 19,685 feet and a cruising speed of 200 miles per hour, the aircraft's vulnerability earned it the nickname Hamaki, cigar, or Type 1 lighter among Japanese crews, a grim reference to its tendency to catch fire upon impact. However, for this mission, 6 6M3 Model 32-0 fighters from the 204th Air Group would provide escort support. At 59, Yamamoto continued to be Japan's sharpest strategic thinker. Originally named Isoroku Takano and later adopted by the Yamamoto family, he was 5 feet 3 inches tall but carried himself with the dignity of a samurai descendant. His left hand was marked by scars from the Battle of Tsushima Strait on May 27, 1905, where he lost his index and middle fingers to Russian shrapnel after a gun turret explosion aboard the armored cruiser Nishin. Despite his injury, his love for calligraphy, skill in poker, and ability to command respect through sheer charisma never faded. While studying at Harvard University from 1919 to 1921, he hitchhiked across America, visiting automobile factories in Detroit, oil refineries in Texas, and aircraft manufacturing plants in California. This journey convinced him that a war with America would ultimately be unwinnable, a belief summed up in his famous remark about enjoying 6 months of freedom before facing inevitable defeat. The American strategy depended on signals intelligence maintaining absolute secrecy. If Japanese naval commands suspected their codes were compromised, they would either cancel Yamamoto's flight or alter the schedule. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, Admiral William Bull Halsey, commander of the South Pacific, Rear Admiral Mark Mitchell, commander of Air Solomons, and, ultimately, President Franklin Roosevelt himself, who reportedly gave the clear order, "Get Yamamoto." The planning for the interception was a joint effort involving several officers. Marine Major John Condon, the operations officer for Commander Aircraft Solomons, created the initial flight plan, calculating fuel consumption and navigation points. However, Mitchell reviewed and rejected Condon's plan, deeming the airspeeds and timing estimates insufficient for the P-38's capabilities. Mitchell started from the ground up, working closely with his pilots throughout the night to create a strategy that would boost their chances while minimizing the risk of detection. The final flight path comprised 5 meticulously planned segments, each designed to avoid Japanese radar coverage while accounting for wind drift and magnetic deviation. Intelligence reports highlighted several factors that favored their mission. April 18 marked exactly 1 year since the Doolittle raid on Tokyo, adding a symbolic significance. Weather forecasts suggested favorable conditions with scattered clouds and good visibility. Most crucially, the Japanese appeared oblivious to the fact that their codes had been compromised. Analyzing radio traffic showed normal operational patterns without indications of increased security measures. If they could maintain the element of surprise, it would be total. The absence of an escort presented a major challenge that influenced much of the mission's preparation. The Mitsubishi A6M3 Model 32-0 had better maneuverability than the P-38 at medium and low altitudes. The Zero boasted a top speed of 336 miles per hour at 19,685 feet, a climb rate of 3,100 feet per minute, and the capability to outmaneuver any American fighter, with a turning radius of less than 1,000 feet. It achieved these remarkable figures through substantial weight reduction, weighing only 3,980 pounds compared to the P-38's 12,780 pounds. The pilot had minimal armor protection, with only a single 55mm thick bulletproof glass panel, and it did not feature self-sealing fuel tanks, making it vulnerable to incendiary ammunition. Its structural integrity was designed to meet just the essential requirements. In a dogfight below 20,000 feet, the Zero could easily outmatch a P-38. However, during a high-speed dive attack, where firepower and structural strength were paramount, the P-38 held considerable advantages. Lieutenant Besby Frank Holmes thoroughly examined Zero combat tactics while stationed in the Solomons. Japanese pilots generally flew in tight escort formations, positioning themselves 1,000 to 1,500 feet above and slightly behind the bombers in groups of 3. Standard protocol required that the escorts would swiftly engage any attacking fighters while the bombers maintained their course, relying on speed and defensive armament for protection. At midnight in the packed operations tent, Rear Admiral Mark Mitchell, the commander of Air Solomons, addressed the assembled pilots directly. Known for his advocacy of naval aviation and his command of the USS Hornet during the Doolittle raid exactly 1 year earlier, Mitchell understood the mission's significance. 18 P-38s would participate in the operation. 4 aircraft, labeled as the Killer Flight, would engage the bombers directly. 12 planes were assigned to provide high cover against the anticipated response from the fighters at Kahili Airfield. 2 more aircraft were kept as backups in case of mechanical failures. The pilots selected for the Killer Flight included Captain Lanphier, Lieutenant Barber, Lieutenant Holmes, and Lieutenant Raymond K. Heading of 290 degrees for 27 minutes, covering 89 miles. Leg 3, heading of 305 degrees for 38 minutes, covering 125 miles. Leg 4, heading of 330 degrees for 16 minutes, covering 52 miles. Leg 5, heading of 290 degrees for 21 minutes, covering 70 miles while climbing to the attack altitude. Each segment was carefully calculated to avoid Japanese observation posts on New Georgia, Vella La Vella, and the Treasury Islands, while also factoring in expected wind drift. There was no margin for navigation mistakes. Even a 1-degree error over the distance could result in a significant miscalculation, potentially leaving inadequate fuel to reach the target. The pilot's survival gear underscored the mission's urgency. Mae West life preservers were included for a potential water landing, though survival chances in shark-infested waters were slim. Jungle survival kits contained water purification tablets, emergency rations, fishing line, and crucial medical supplies for bailouts over Bougainville. Each pilot carried a standard M1911A 1.45 caliber pistol along with extra magazines, fully aware that being captured would likely result in execution. The treatment of downed American pilots by the Japanese had become increasingly brutal as the war intensified. Intelligence from rescued prisoners detailed instances of beheadings, medical experiments performed without anesthesia, and confirmed cases of cannibalism. The pilots understood that running out of fuel over water would almost certainly result in death from exposure or shark attacks. A mechanical failure over enemy territory would lead to even graver outcomes. Lieutenant Colonel Luther S. Moore, the weather officer, reviewed the meteorological data one final time. Surface winds were coming from the southeast at 8 knots, while winds at 5,000 feet blew from the south at 15 knots, and at 10,000 feet, they came from the southwest at 22 knots. Tropical weather in the Solomon Islands was notoriously unpredictable, and a storm system forming anywhere along the route could endanger the mission. Unexpected challenges could leave the P-38s low on fuel for their return journey. The meteorologist forecasted a 70% likelihood of good weather, but everyone was aware that the conditions in the Solomon Islands could change rapidly. Towering cumulonimbus clouds could form from clear skies in less than an hour. There would be total radio silence until they encountered the enemy. The P-38 CR-274N radio sets were specifically tuned to the frequency of 6,710 kilocycles, a channel that was unlikely to be intercepted by Japanese listening posts. However, any transmission could alert enemy forces. Mitchell would navigate the entire formation using dead reckoning, along with a compass, airspeed indicator, clock, and mental calculations. There were no radio beacons to confirm their position and no landmarks across the endless Pacific swells, except for the occasional islands that needed to be avoided. The navigational skills of one man would decide whether 18 aircraft would reach their destination or disappear into the vast ocean. Lieutenant Julius Jack Jacobson performed a final check of his aircraft's weapons. Each of the 4 Browning A&M 250 caliber machine guns was loaded with 500 rounds of M2 ball, M1 incendiary, and M2 armor-piercing ammunition linked in belts. The firing rate varied between 750 and 850 rounds per minute for each gun. The 20mm Hispano M2 cannon was equipped with 150 rounds of high-explosive and armor-piercing ammunition. The concentrated firepower at the front of the P-38 generated a deadly zone capable of severing a bomber's wing spar in just seconds. However, firing at full capacity restricted the machine guns to less than 37 seconds of use and the cannon to under 12 seconds. Each burst had to count. In the early morning darkness of April 18, ground crews completed final preparations under the vigilant supervision of their crew chiefs. Master Sergeant Leo B. Godfrey managed the arming teams, ensuring that every round was properly seated and each belt was correctly aligned. The fuel tanks were filled with 100-octane aviation gasoline, and the internal tanks were topped off to 360 gallons. Drop tanks were confirmed to hold 160 gallons each. The ammunition belts were loaded with a specific combination of ball, armor-piercing, and incendiary rounds in a 4:1:1 ratio. Connections for the drop tanks were checked and rechecked, as a mechanical failure in even a single shackle could prevent an aircraft from flying or, worse, cause a more serious problem. A tank became immobilized, resulting in a hazardous drag. Oil levels were verified, hydraulic pressures were evaluated, and control surfaces were examined for full functionality. The Japanese Navy's 11th Air Fleet at Rebel adhered to strict protocols when transporting high-ranking officers. Vice Admiral Giannisai Kosaka, who led the Southeast Area Fleet under Yamamoto's command, had been against the inspection tour. Following the Japanese withdrawal from Guadalcanal in February, American fighter activity had intensified around Bougainville. Intelligence reports suggested that the Americans had nearly 200 fighters operating from Guadalcanal, the Russell Islands, and other forward positions. Nevertheless, Yamamoto was determined to personally commend the pilots of Operation Igo, the recent Japanese air campaign that claimed inflated victories against American shipping. Reports indicated the sinking of 1 cruiser, 2 destroyers, and 25 transports, while the actual losses were merely 1 destroyer, 1 corvette, 1 tanker, and 2 cargo ships. Chief Petty Officer Hiroshi Hayashi managed the preparation of Yamamoto's aircraft at Lakanai Airfield. Betty Bomber, tail number 323 from the 705th Air Group, was selected for its exceptional maintenance record and reliable engines. The aircraft had completed 47 combat missions without any significant mechanical failures. Extra fuel tanks were installed in the bomb bay to guarantee ample reserves. The admiral's seat was located on the left side behind the pilot for the best aerial view. A special mount was provided for Yamamoto's personal katana sword, a family treasure from the 16th century Momoyama period. The escort fighters belonged to the 204th Air Group, an elite unit with extensive combat experience over the Solomon Islands. The 6 chosen pilots each had an average of over 500 combat hours. Among them was Petty Officer First Class Shoichi Sugita, who would later become one of Japan's leading aces with over 70 victories before his death in April 1945. Also in the escort was Petty Officer First Class Kenji Yanagiya, a veteran of 100 missions who felt deeply honored to protect the combined fleet commander. They had faced American P-38s, P-39s, P-40s, and F-4F Wildcats in numerous battles. The advantage of lightning speed diminished below 15,000 feet due to compressibility issues and the Zero's superior power-to-weight ratio at lower elevations. Its turning radius at low altitudes was double that of the Zero's. In a low-altitude turning engagement, the Zero pilots believed they had the upper hand, aside from firepower and armor. At 0725 local time, or 0525 Tokyo time, on April 18, Mitchell's P-38s began taking off from Fighter Strip No. 2 at Henderson Field. The takeoff sequence was carefully orchestrated to optimize both time and fuel consumption. Mitchell led the formation, followed by his flight of three, then Lanphier's attack flight, with the cover flights bringing up the rear. Lieutenant McCleanahan experienced a blown tire during the takeoff roll, causing his P-38 to skid off the runway in a cloud of coral dust and lose its right wheel. Though he was unharmed, he was out of the mission. Lieutenant Gilmore's fuel transfer pump failed during the climb, preventing him from accessing his drop tank fuel, which forced him to turn back immediately. 16 P-38s continued with their mission, albeit with fewer planes than initially intended. The already narrow margin for error had become even tighter. Mitchell led the group just 30 to 50 feet above the water to avoid detection by Japanese radar. Within moments, salt spray coated the windscreens, requiring constant cleaning. The pilots flew in silence, relying only on visual cues to maintain their formations. Each pilot fought their own battles against boredom and fatigue. After 2 hours and 5 minutes of flying at such a low altitude, they continually adjusted their throttles to stay aligned, monitored engine gauges, and resisted disorientation. The ocean swells undulated below them in a relentless rhythm, almost hypnotic in their consistency. Several pilots later reported struggling with sleepiness, using various tactics like slapping their faces or singing loudly to remain vigilant. Sunlight streamed through the plexiglass canopies, turning the cockpits into sweltering ovens despite the airflow. Lieutenant Roger J. E. Ames, flying in the cover flight, grew increasingly concerned about his fuel consumption. The drag from his drop tanks was more significant than anticipated, likely due to an improper attachment angle or manufacturing flaws. Based on the current fuel usage, he would have roughly 5 minutes of reserve fuel for the return journey. The math was simple but concerning. If they used too much fuel on the outbound leg, they wouldn't make it back, yet if they conserved too much, they might lack enough power for combat maneuvers. Each pilot constantly made minor adjustments to their pitch and throttle, balancing mission demands with their survival odds. The Allison engines hummed consistently, their synchronized noise becoming almost soothing over the hours. At 0600 Tokyo time, or 0800 local, Yamamoto's two-bomber formation lifted off from Rabaul precisely on time. The Admiral wore his white uniform adorned with full medals, including the Order of the Chrysanthemum and the Order of the Golden Kite, intending to impress the troops in the forward area with the Imperial Navy's prestige. His demeanor was reported to be serious. Several staff officers later noted that he appeared to have a sense of unease about the flight. Vice Admiral Mito Magaki, Yamamoto's chief of staff and a close friend, was on board Betty Bomber No. 326 along with several staff officers. The formation ascended to 6,500 feet, with the escorts arranged in two groups of 3 planes each. Visibility was excellent, as scattered cumulus clouds at 4,000 to 5,000 feet provided occasional cover. Warrant Officer Kenji Yanagir, flying escort in tail number 3081, scanned the sky, relying on instincts honed over years of training. 3 years of combat had sharpened his senses to nearly extraordinary levels. He could identify aircraft types from distances where other pilots saw only dots. His peripheral vision was skilled at detecting even the faintest movements against the cloudy backdrop. However, on this particular morning, he focused primarily on maintaining his exact position within the formation. The flight from Rabaul to Balali had been undertaken countless times without incident. American fighters had never ventured this far north in significant numbers. The main threat seemed to come from operational errors rather than enemy action. 34, making contact for the first time after a period of silence. The separation was roughly 5 miles, with a difference in altitude of 6,000 feet. 8 aircraft flew in flawless formation, precisely where they needed to be. Mitchell felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with admiration. They had found the proverbial needle in the Pacific haystack. 2 Betty bombers in echelon formation and 60 fighters in 2 groups of 3 were completely unaware of the 16 P-38s climbing toward them from below and behind. Mitchell swiftly commanded the drop tanks to be jettisoned. "Release those tanks, all flights, let's go get them." The 16 65-gallon tanks fell into the ocean as the P-38s shed their drag. Engines were pushed to war emergency power, producing 1,475 horsepower each. The Lightnings raced past 300 miles per hour, climbing at a maximum sustainable rate of 2,800 feet per minute. The strike flight would carry out the attack while Mitchell led the cover flight higher to intercept any fighters from Kahili. Captain Lanphier noticed the escorting Zeros beginning to respond. They had spotted the approaching P-38s and were dropping their own belly tanks, veering off to engage. Standard Zero doctrine dictated that they defend the bombers by intercepting the attackers. 2,000 yards, 1,500, 1,000. When he reached 500 yards, Barber unleashed his entire arsenal. For streams of .50 caliber bullets and 20mm cannon shells rained down on the bomber's right engine and wing root. The results were swift and catastrophic. The right engine of the Betty burst into bright orange flames as concentrated fire severed the wing spar. The bomber violently rolled to the left, spiraling out of control. Barber pulled back on the controls to avoid a collision, feeling his P-38 strain under the G-forces as he caught a glimpse of the Betty's fuselage disappearing into the jungle canopy, leaving a trail of fire and debris behind. A dark plume of smoke marked the impact site. One bomber had gone down, but Barber couldn't tell which one was carrying Yamamoto as he looked for the second bomber. Initially, Holmes and Hine had followed Barber, but they got separated during the chaotic maneuvers. Holmes then spotted the second Betty flying low over the water, racing south along the Bougainville coastline at full throttle. Vice Admiral Ugarki's pilot chose a different escape route, diving toward the ocean instead of the jungle, hoping the water's surface would protect him from attacks below. Holmes rolled into position to attack, but his closing speed was too high. He unleashed a long burst that hit the Betty's right engine, creating a white vapor trail of leaking fuel and oil, but he overshot before causing any significant damage. Barber targeted the second bomber right after Holmes completed his run. The Betty flew just 50 feet above the water, its damaged engine emitting smoke. Barber prepared for a deflection shot, leading the target by 30 degrees to account for its speed. His first burst skimmed over the surface, sending up sprays, before it struck the bomber's fuselage. Large pieces of metal sheeting were ripped away, some hitting Barber's P-38 with noticeable impacts. The Betty's left engine erupted in flames. The pilot attempted a controlled water landing but crashed into the ocean at over 100 miles per hour. The aircraft broke apart on impact, with the fuselage separating from the wings. Meanwhile, Lanphier engaged the escort Zeros in a fierce vertical scissors maneuver. His P-38's superior speed allowed him to maintain his energy while the lighter Zeros relied on their agility. Lanphier claimed to have shot down one Zero during this engagement, describing how he rolled upside down and fired at its wing roots, causing it to explode. However, Japanese records show that no escort fighters were lost. The remaining Zeros, led by Warrant Officer Yanagiya, focused on fending off the American fighters rather than pursuing a decisive confrontation. Their primary goal of protecting the bombers had already ended in failure. The top cover flight, led by Mitchell, was scanning for enemy fighters from Kahili Airfield, located just 20 miles from the intercept point. The expected wave of 75 Zeros never showed up. It was either a complete surprise, or the Japanese fighters were occupied elsewhere. Mitchell had an altitude advantage at 18,000 feet, ready to dive on any interceptors that ascended. Below him, the attack flight concluded their missions and returned home. The entire encounter lasted less than 10 minutes, with only about 3 minutes of actual fighting over the target. The mission's success depended on which bomber had carried Yamamoto. Lieutenant Barber's P-38 had taken significant damage during the fight. His plane was peppered with 104 bullet holes from the bomber's 7.7mm Type 92 defensive machine guns, and possibly from Zero fighters as well. Hydraulic fluid leaked from damaged lines, leaving reddish streaks along the fuselage. One engine was running roughly, likely due to debris and battle damage. Both Allison engines continued to run smoothly, and the lightning remained manageable. Barber began the lengthy journey home, carefully monitoring engine temperatures and fuel consumption. Any unusual vibrations could signal an impending engine failure over 400 miles of perilous ocean. The return flight tested every pilot's endurance and skills. Several aircraft were running on dangerously low fuel. Lieutenant Holmes encountered engine problems that forced him to reduce his speed, lagging behind the others. They mostly adhered to radio discipline, despite the temptation to coordinate or seek help. Each pilot concentrated on their own calculations, determining if their remaining fuel would take them home. The survival math was being calculated simultaneously in 16 cockpits. As they approached the Russell Islands, roughly 200 miles from home, several pilots faced critical decisions. Lieutenant Heinz's fuel gauges showed alarmingly low levels. Rather than risk a ditching at sea, he could attempt to land at the emergency strip on Banaka Island. However, Japanese submarines had been reported nearby, making the chances of rescue uncertain. At 30 local time, Fighter Strip 2 appeared just as expected. Several aircraft were running dangerously low on fuel. Holmes landed with both engines sputtering, his tanks nearly dry. Others touched down with less than 10 gallons remaining, perhaps only 3 minutes of flight time left. The line between success and failure had been drawn in gallons of fuel. As the pilots shut off their engines, ground crews quickly swarmed the planes, counting bullet holes and assessing the damage. The burning question on everyone's mind was whether they had achieved their goal. Which bomber had taken down Yamamoto? The pilots could only confirm that 2 bombers were shot down, but pinpointing targets was impossible amid the fierce fighting. Intelligence officers would have to wait for the Japanese response to learn the true results of the mission. The anticipation would be agonizing. That evening, as the tropical night settled over Guadalcanal, the pilots gathered in the officers' club, a rundown structure made from repurposed wood and captured Japanese materials. Captain Lanphier, always eager to be the center of attention, quickly began to share his version of events. He claimed he had shot down Yamamoto's bomber after executing a dramatic vertical maneuver, rolling upside down and firing from above. However, his account would have required him to be in 2 places at once, battling Zeros while simultaneously attacking the bombers. Lieutenant Barber quietly disputed this story, detailing his direct assault from behind on the lead bomber. The following day, April 19, Japanese search teams discovered Admiral Yamamoto's downed bomber. The wreckage was scattered across dense jungle about 4 miles inland from Moila Point, near the village of Arku on Bougainville. The search was led by Lieutenant Commander Tabuchi Shigeru of the 26th Air Flotilla. Yamamoto's body was found ejected from the main wreckage but still strapped into his seat. 1 bullet had pierced below his left shoulder blade and exited above his right eye, while another struck his jaw. Death was instantaneous, likely occurring during Barber's initial attack run. The psychological blow to the Japanese Navy was immeasurably severe. Yamamoto was more than just a fleet commander, he embodied the very spirit of Japanese naval tradition and strategic thinking. His understanding of combined fleet operations was unmatched, and his ability to inspire loyalty among his subordinates was legendary. His realistic assessment of American capabilities had been the only limit on Japanese strategic ambitions. Captain Yasuji Watanabe, one of Yamamoto's staff officers who survived the second bomber's crash despite serious injuries, later described the admiral's death as an unfillable gap. Watanabe had played shogi with Yamamoto the night before, and the admiral had seemed unusually accepting of his fate. Japanese naval intelligence quickly grew suspicious that the Americans had deciphered their codes. The precision of the intercepted message, arriving right on target after a 600-mile journey, felt too coincidental to be mere chance. The timing, exactly 1 year after the dual little raid, suggested meticulous planning, but admitting a breach in their codes would mean acknowledging a serious intelligence failure that could threaten ongoing operations. Instead, Japanese officials maintained that Yamamoto had been killed while leading forward operations, reinforcing the narrative that his death occurred during regular combat rather than a deliberate assassination. The American reaction was initially subdued due to security worries. If the Japanese acknowledged that their codes had been compromised, the intelligence advantage that had been vital at Midway and enabled the Yamamoto mission would disappear. President Roosevelt received the news with somber satisfaction but demanded total secrecy. Admiral Nimitz was worried that public scrutiny might reveal American code-breaking capabilities. For over a month, the American public remained unaware of Yamamoto's death, let alone that American pilots had caused it. The argument over who downed Yamamoto started right after the landing and would taint relationships for years. Captain Lanphier, keenly aware of the media's attention, strongly advocated for his claim. His account, which became more elaborate over time, described executing a steep vertical maneuver, flipping upside down, and firing at the bomber's wing from above. This story would have required Lanphier to defy the laws of physics by being in two places simultaneously while performing actions beyond the P-38's capabilities. Lieutenant Barber's account was more straightforward and matched the physical evidence better. He described a simple pursuit and attack on the lead bomber, followed by a separate strike on the second one. Japanese witnesses, including Zero pilot Yanager, who was interviewed post-war, confirmed only seeing one P-38 engage the lead bomber from behind and below, just as Barber recounted. The angle at which the bullets hit Yamamoto's body, coming from below and behind, matched Barber's attack strategy perfectly. The pattern of bullet holes in the wreckage indicated that the fire originated from below and behind, not from above. This disagreement would persist for decades, straining relationships among those involved in the mission. In October 1943, Time magazine published an article about the operation that mentioned Lanphier, nearly compromising operational security. In 1991, the Air Force officially credited both Lanphier and Barber with a half-kill each, a political compromise that left everyone unhappy. By 2003, after a thorough review of Japanese records, crash site evidence, and witness testimonies, historians concluded that Barber was solely responsible for Yamamoto's downfall. Major Mitchell, who adeptly led the mission, received the Navy Cross instead of the Medal of Honor that had originally been proposed. The security breach from early coverage frustrated Navy leadership. Every pilot involved in the mission was awarded the Navy Cross, acknowledging the exceptional risks and importance of the operation. Mitchell's exceptional navigation abilities, successfully tracking a moving target after 600 miles of dead reckoning, deserved more acknowledgement than inter-service politics permitted. The technical lessons learned from Operation Vengeance influenced American fighter development for the rest of the war. The P-38's unique combination of range, firepower, and speed was vital. No other American fighter could have carried out this mission. The reliable twin-engine design of the Lightning enabled damaged planes to return home when single-engine fighters would have been lost. Its concentrated nose armament produced immediate, devastating effects that wing-mounted guns could not match. These lessons would lead to the creation of long-range escort fighters like the P-51D Mustang. The elimination of Yamamoto was a significant setback for Japanese naval aviation, and his successor, Admiral Koga, lacked both strategic insight and charismatic leadership. Koga would die in a plane crash less than a year later, in March 1944, further weakening Japanese naval command. The subsequent actions of the Japanese Navy showcased increasingly desperate tactics rather than a unified strategy. The pivotal battle that Yamamoto sought to orchestrate in order to wipe out American carrier forces never materialized. Instead, Japanese naval aviation faced significant losses during the Marianas Turkey Shoot and the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The psychological impact extended beyond mere military results. Japanese propaganda had portrayed Yamamoto as invincible, the supreme naval strategist destined to lead Japan to inevitable victory. His death shattered this perception. If Yamamoto could be located and killed, what did that mean for Japan's future? Morale within the Japanese military began to decline, a trend that would only worsen with each defeat. The overconfidence that had defined Japanese strategic thinking following early victories transformed into a sense of desperate fatalism. American code-breaking efforts continued to provide critical advantages throughout the Pacific conflict. The Japanese never fully acknowledged that their codes had been compromised, opting for minor tweaks rather than significant overhauls. This lack of realization proved costly at the Philippine Sea, where American fighters devastated Japanese naval aviation in what became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The ability to understand enemy intentions transformed American defensive tactics into strategic ambushes. The loss of Yamamoto deeply affected those who participated in the mission. Lieutenant Raymond Heine was later reported missing in action, never returning from another assignment. Captain Lanphier left the military after the war to pursue a career in politics and business, capitalizing on his alleged role in Yamamoto's death, despite disputes over his version of events. Lieutenant Barber continued his Air Force career, retiring as a colonel in 1961. His humility prevented him from fully challenging Lanphier's account until later in life when historical evidence validated his perspective. The mission's success hinged on exceptional collaboration among intelligence agencies, naval leadership, and Army aviation. The Navy cracked the code with assistance from cryptanalysts like Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton. Marine Major John Condon laid the groundwork for mission planning. Army Air Force pilots executed the interception. This inter-service cooperation, often lacking in other Pacific operations, proved that unified command could achieve remarkable results. The insights gained would influence American military strategy for the remainder of World War II and beyond. Admiral Yamamoto's death represented more than just the loss of one commander, it marked the end of Japan's most profound strategic perspective. He was the only Japanese leader who fully understood America's industrial capabilities and resolve. His famous quote, "I can run wild for 6 months, maybe a year, but after that I have no confidence," highlighted his recognition that Japan could not endure a prolonged war. His replacement by leaders who valued spiritual dominance over practical realities accelerated Japan's decline. The timing of Yamamoto's death on April 18, 1943, was particularly significant, occurring exactly 1 year after the Doolittle raid on Tokyo, when American forces struck at the heart of Japanese military command. This symbolism was intentional and powerful, showcasing America's capacity to hit precise targets from great distances. No Japanese commander was secure, the hunters had become the hunted. The psychological impact rippled through the Japanese military command, causing uncertainty and second-guessing in their strategic decisions. A thorough evaluation of the mission revealed both the advantages and limitations of American fighter operations. The P-38s had reached their maximum range, with some returning nearly out of fuel. If Yamamoto's flight had been delayed by just 30 minutes, the American fighters could have run out of fuel while searching for their target. The delicate balance between success and failure hinged on mere gallons of fuel and minutes of flight time. This tight margin highlighted the need for longer-range fighters and better fuel management systems. The role of weather in mission success is crucial. Clear visibility at the intercept point enabled visual identification at the longest range. Scattered clouds on the return route provided concealment from potential Japanese interceptors. A tropical storm at any point along the way would have resulted in mission cancellation. As pilots often noted, the weather gods had undoubtedly favored them on April 18, 1943. A small shift in the wind could have endangered the mission. The Japanese efforts to conceal Yamamoto's death underscored the magnitude of the loss. For more than a month, Japanese propaganda continued to issue statements supposedly from Yamamoto. His death was finally announced on May 21, 1943, revealing that it occurred while he was in combat with the enemy. A state funeral on June 5 attracted hundreds of thousands of mourners to the streets of Tokyo. Emperor Hirohito himself attended, an exceptional honor that highlighted Yamamoto's prominent status. Some of his ashes were interred at Thomas Cemetery in Tokyo, while the rest were placed in his family temple in Nagaka. The American pilots who carried out the mission struggled with conflicting emotions. They had successfully taken down a respected adversary, acknowledged by many as a military genius. Yamamoto had opposed war with America, recognizing its futility better than those who directed him to plan it. Yet, he had masterminded Pearl Harbor, making him a legitimate target for retribution. The ethical dilemmas surrounding targeted killings, even in wartime, troubled some of those involved for many years. Intelligence officer Edwin Layton, who had supported the mission's approval, later contemplated Yamamoto's death with conflicting feelings. He had known Yamamoto from diplomatic events in the 1930s before the war. Layton acknowledged that while Yamamoto's strategic vision posed a threat to America, it stemmed from a realistic perspective rather than mere military fantasy. At the same time, Layton understood that Yamamoto's death would save American lives by disrupting Japanese naval strategies. War often demands such difficult choices. The mission highlighted America's technological edge in various ways. Code-breaking provided the intelligence, long-range fighters acted as the weapon, and accurate navigation ensured the delivery system. However, technology alone didn't ensure victory. The human factors, Mitchell's navigation skills, Barber's marksmanship, and the dedication of the maintenance crew transformed technical capability into operational success. This combination of human talent and mechanical accuracy would characterize American military superiority throughout the Pacific War. Post-war analysis revealed just how nearly the mission came to failure at several points. If Lieutenant Canning hadn't spotted the Japanese formation when he did, the P-38s might have flown right past their target. If Barber hadn't continued pursuing the diving bomber, Yamamoto could have escaped into the jungle. If Holmes hadn't damaged the second bomber, allowing Barber to finish it off, witnesses might have survived to reveal American code-breaking capabilities. Every link in the chain held together, but just by a thread. Squadron records detailed the mission's narrow margins vividly. Fuel consumption data indicated that several planes flew beyond their calculated ranges, succeeding only due to favorable winds and meticulous engine management. Ammunition reports showed that Barber used about 70% of his available rounds during his 2 attack runs. Maintenance logs noted significant damage to several aircraft, highlighting the intensity of Japanese defensive fire during those brief combat encounters. The strategic fallout from Yamamoto's death extended beyond immediate military effects. His absence removed the one Japanese leader who could have secured equitable peace terms as the war began to turn against Japan. Yamamoto understood that Japan couldn't win a prolonged conflict against American industrial strength. His successors, lacking his vision and influence, resorted to increasingly desperate measures that prolonged the war and increased casualties for both sides. The kamikaze tactics that emerged later in the war highlighted the strategic failure that followed Yamamoto's passing. Weather records from April 18, 1943, confirmed the exceptional conditions that enabled the mission to succeed. Visibility exceeded 10 miles for most of the route, with only a few scattered clouds. Wind speeds and directions closely matched the forecasts. Such favorable weather occurred perhaps once every 10 days in the typical climate of the Solomon Islands. The mission seized a fleeting opportunity that might not arise again for weeks. The intelligence breakthrough that made Operation Vengeance feasible relied on hundreds of cryptanalysts, translators, and analysts working entirely in secrecy at Station Hypo and other facilities. Their contribution to achieving victory often went unnoticed, overshadowed by more visible combat actions. Yet, without their meticulous and dedicated work, the Yamamoto mission would have been impossible. The codebreakers provided the weapon, while the pilots merely employed it. A technical examination of the downed Betty bomber revealed the catastrophic effects of concentrated forward-firing armament. The P-38's .450 caliber machine guns in 20 mm cannon created a zone of destruction approximately 30 inches in diameter at standard combat ranges. Within this area, nothing could survive. The bomber's aluminum structure was shredded, control cables were severed, fuel lines were ruptured, and the crew was killed instantly. No amount of armor could withstand such concentrated firepower. The inability of the Zero escort fighters to protect the bombers highlighted a significant weakness in Japanese tactical strategy. The escorts followed their training, engaging the attacking fighters rather than providing direct protection for the bombers. This predictable tactic allowed Barber to reach the bombers while Lanphier dealt with the Zeros. American fighters consistently exploited this tactical inflexibility in subsequent operations. Admiral Nimitz's decision to approve the mission stemmed from a thorough evaluation of risks versus rewards. If the mission had failed and resulted in heavy casualties, it could have compromised American code-breaking capabilities without achieving any objectives. A premature leak of details might have prompted the Japanese to completely change their codes. Nimitz accepted these risks because Yamamoto was a unique target, a leader whose expertise couldn't be replaced. History validated his choice. The mission planning process showcased American strengths in personnel management and strategic development. Various options were considered and discarded. Contingency plans were devised for potential failures, supported by detailed pattern analysis. Fuel consumption was calculated down to the last drop. This careful methodology, combining thorough preparation with tactical flexibility, would characterize successful American operations throughout the Pacific War. The mission's codename, Operation Vengeance, reflected the American feelings after Pearl Harbor. However, the pilots involved reported having little personal wish for revenge. They tackled the mission with a sense of professional detachment. The broader feeling of satisfaction in avenging Pearl Harbor was felt by the strategic planners and political leaders. For the pilots, merely surviving and finishing the mission was rewarding enough. This operation marked a shift in American fighter tactics from a defensive approach to offensive strategies. In the war's early days, American fighters struggled to protect their bombers from Japanese assaults. By April 1943, they were effectively carrying out complex offensive missions deep into Japanese-controlled airspace. This transformation was driven by advancements in aircraft, improved training, enhanced tactics, and a growing confidence from prior successes. The significance of Operation Vengeance extends beyond its immediate military results. It demonstrated that individual leadership could still be vital in industrialized warfare and that accurate intelligence could enable precise military strikes. That technological advantage was of little value without the human capability to utilize it effectively. These lessons would resonate in future American military endeavors, from Vietnam to the War on Terror. In the end, Operation Vengeance showcased American warfare at its peak, cutting-edge technology backed by precise intelligence, careful planning executed with tactical flexibility. Individual expertise within a cohesive team effort. The mix of these elements resulted in the downfall of Admiral Yamamoto, taking with him Japan's best opportunity for a negotiated peace. The Pacific War would continue for another 28 months, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. On April 18, 1943, 18 American pilots embarked on what appeared to be an impossible mission. It ended with Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto dead in the Bougainville jungle, Japan's naval strategy in disarray, and American triumph in the Pacific becoming ever more certain. The longest fighter intercept mission in history succeeded through a combination of brilliant strategy, advanced technology, exceptional flying skills, and remarkable fortune. The targeted elimination of essential enemy leaders. The age of strategic assassination had started, transforming the nature of warfare.